Take a close look at the French national football shirt. Right there, stitched proudly above the cockerel, you'll see two gold stars. They represent the absolute pinnacle of the sport, ultimate World Cup glory. But you know what those stars don't show? They hide generations of agonizing, heartbreaking near misses that happened right between them. Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a massive, truly fascinating paradox. We're going to look at how a country that literally helped invent the World Cup spent the better part of a century breaking its own heart before finally figuring out how to conquer the globe. So let's just dive right into it. The central puzzle of French football really boils down to this. France has pretty much never lacked absolute genius. For 70 years, they reliably produced these transcendent, once-in-a-generation players that the rest of the world completely envied. So why on earth did it take them from the very first World Cup in 1930 all the way to 1998 to actually lift the trophy? Well, the core thesis we're uncovering today is that French flair and pure talent constantly fell short until they finally learned to marry that raw genius to ruthless organization and deep emotional resilience.
All right, part one, the beautiful losers. We're going to wind the clock back to the era stretching from the 1950s through the 1980s.
To really understand their ultimate triumphs, we first have to understand this era of the beautiful losers. This was a time when France leaned almost entirely on single transcendent superstars. Just think about this number for a second. 13. That is the absolutely staggering number of goals scored by French striker Just Fontaine in the 1958 World Cup. It's a record for a single tournament that is still unbroken today. Supported by the brilliant playmaker Raymond Kopa, France had the raw attacking talent to score pretty much at will. But they ran headfirst into a deeper, much more organized Brazilian team, featuring a very young Pelé, by the way, and lost in the semifinals. It proved a tough lesson. Having the best individual players just wasn't enough against the best overall team. And if you look at this timeline, notice the massive sheer emptiness between these peaks. After a bronze medal in 1958, French football essentially vanished from the global stage for a whole generation. We're talking completely failing to even qualify throughout the late 60s and early 70s. This is the incredible danger of relying purely on random, uncultivated genius. Because without a real system in place, you spend decades just watching the tournament from your living room. Now, when France finally did emerge from the wilderness, they did it in style. They brought us what is perhaps the most aesthetically pleasing midfield in the history of the sport, the carré magique, or the magic square. Led by the absolute brilliance of Michel Platini in the 1980s, this fluid four-man midfield was built purely for beautiful attacking flair. They created breathtaking, almost poetic art out there on the pitch. But, as we'll see in a moment, they completely lacked the hard-headed, pragmatic edge you actually need to win championships. And the ultimate tragedy of that magic square happened in 1982, during what is forever known in France as the Night of Seville. In the World Cup semifinal against West Germany, France found themselves up 3-1 in extra time. They were playing beautiful, flowing football. But the West Germans, they were absolutely relentless. They completely refused to die, mounted a massive comeback, and ended up beating France on penalties. So the hard lesson here is this. Being the most beautiful team out there means absolutely nothing if you don't have the gritty resilience to lock down a lead. Which brings us to part two, unlocking the winning formula. Let's look at the massive paradigm shift of the 1990s. So after humiliatingly failing to even qualify for the 1994 World Cup, the romantic era of the 80s was totally dead. The solution arrived in the form of manager Aimé Jacquet, and he completely inverted the traditional French style. Instead of banking on individual flair and beautiful play that inevitably ended in tears, Jacquet became the ultimate pragmatist. He wanted guys who would run, who would defend, and who would subordinate their massive egos to a strict defensive structure. He literally left some of the most charismatic and talented French players at home if they didn't fit his defense-first, team-oriented system. It was a real game changer.
And this totally ruthless philosophy, it all came together perfectly on home soil for the 1998 World Cup. Jacquet assembled this rock-solid, incredibly resilient defense. It was anchored by a holding midfielder named Didier Deschamps, a guy critics dismissively called a mere water carrier. But you know what? That unglamorous, gritty defensive spine was exactly what they needed. It completely freed up their new transcendent genius, Zinedine Zidane, allowing him to work his magic without leaving the rest of the team exposed.
It was like all the stars finally aligned in '98. As the breakdown here shows, it required 3 equal parts coming together. Zidane's sheer individual genius, a totally ruthless defensive organization, and a collective resilience that absolutely refused to crack. That specific formula resulted in a stunning 3-0 victory over Brazil in the final. For the first time in 68 years, France won the World Cup, and it united a hugely diverse nation in this incredible, euphoric celebration.
But to be totally fair in this explainer, we have to show you just how fast that winning formula can evaporate when discipline breaks down. Let's fast forward to the 2010 World Cup in South Africa. The team's culture had become incredibly toxic, just full of cliques and massive egos. It culminated in the infamous mutiny of Knysna, where players literally refused to train, going on strike on the team bus while the entire world watched in disbelief. Without organization, leadership, and collective character, all their world-class talent just led to absolute humiliation. It's a pretty stark reminder. Talent without culture is basically a ticking time bomb.
Moving right along to Section 3, the talent factory, let's dig into the actual engines driving all this success. So how exactly does a team bounce back from such wild highs and absolutely terrifying lows? Well, you really have to look at the machinery running behind the scenes. Modern French dominance relies on what we can call dual engines. On one side, you have the Clairefontaine Academy, a systematic, highly elite, state-of-the-art institution built to methodically identify and polish the country's best young players. But the raw material feeding that academy? It overwhelmingly comes from the banlieue. These are the working-class, heavily immigrant suburbs that ring France's major cities. Playing football in these cramped, concrete spaces breeds this chaotic, street-honed resiliency and incredibly explosive technical skill. And that naturally brings us to a really poignant social-cultural reality that our source material highlights perfectly. France's absolute greatest sporting triumphs are overwhelmingly powered by the children of immigrants. From Zidane, who is the son of Algerian immigrants, to that beautiful multicultural squad of 1998, all the way to the superstars of today. The national team is a direct reflection of a highly diverse France. The factory produces the genius, sure, but that genius is deeply, deeply rooted in these immigrant communities. All right, let's hit part 4, the modern superpower. And this is all about Didier Deschamps' incredible rebuild. So, to become a permanent modern superpower, this incredible talent factory still needed the right leadership. Enter Didier Deschamps. Yeah, the exact same water carrier from the 1998 squad. He returns, this time as manager, to execute a totally sequential, step-by-step rebuild. Step 1, fix the toxic culture. He prized character and balance over massive egos, again, even leaving super talented players at home if he had to. Step 2, restore respectability, which they did by making the 2014 quarterfinals and losing with dignity. And finally, step 3, win the whole thing. He literally took a global laughingstock and methodically turned them back into a respectable, unified, and ferociously well-drilled machine. And right into this perfectly organized, highly resilient machine steps the brand new heir to the French lineage of genius, Kylian Mbappé. Coming straight from the bagnoles of Paris, Mbappé brought this explosive, frankly frightening level of speed. But here is the absolute crucial difference from the past. Unlike Platini in the 80s, or even Zidane in his early days, a 19-year-old Mbappé didn't have to carry a flawed team on his back. He walked into a system that Deschamps had already perfectly fine-tuned. And the 2018 World Cup in Russia was just the ultimate proof of this entire explainer's thesis. Deschamps perfectly blended Mbappé's electrifying talent with clinical, counter-attacking tactics. Now, they didn't always dominate possession, and honestly, they weren't always the most romantic or beautiful team to watch, but they were utterly ruthless. They built an impenetrable midfield, a rock-solid defense, and they just punished teams on the break. It all culminated in defeating Croatia 4-2 to claim France's second star. There's a quote from the source material that really hits the nail on the head and brings this whole narrative full circle. Deschamps proved once and for all that world championships are not awarded for style points. The beautiful losers of the 1980s might have our hearts, for sure, but the pragmatists of 1998 and 2018, they have the actual trophies. By completely subordinating flair to structure, France solved the massive paradox that had plagued them for 70 long years. Now, of course, the heartbreak didn't completely vanish forever. Take the 2022 final in Lusail, for example. An incredibly injury-depleted France fell behind 2-0 to Argentina. But then, Mbappé scores a miraculous hat trick, dragging them back into it, only for them to lose on penalties. It was a really agonizing defeat. But you know what? The biggest takeaway for us isn't the failure. The fact that a heavily rotated, pragmatic French side came within literally one penalty kick of retaining the World Cup proves a larger point. They're no longer just periodic contenders. They're a permanent global superpower.
So we are left with this really fascinating reality. The talent factory at Clairefontaine and out in the banlieues, it just continues to run at absolute full speed. The winning formula, matching a transcendent genius like Mbappé with unyielding organization, has been thoroughly, undeniably proven. The days of relying on random, uncultivated brilliance are totally over. The machine is built. So the most provocative question we have to ask as we wrap up this explainer is simply this. With a system this refined and talent this incredibly deep, who is actually going to stop Les Bleus from claiming their third star?